So okay. And I've also gotten a couple unfortunate indications that my internet might be struggling. So juggling a few things here. Can you guys all hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. All right. I got very delayed nods. So maybe there's just a lag. I'll turn my camera off for now. Good thing you guys won't be hearing from me too much today. It's more about you guys anyways. So I'll leave my camera off for a few minutes just while I'm talking. I shared a moment ago that I opened these sessions with a ritual where I'm trying to cultivate a shared intention. I'm exploring out loud what it is that we're doing here, my personal intentions, and I'm inviting people to sort of see it with me and to explore that intention with me. So I just wrote this about an hour ago. I write it anew every time to explore it in a sort of organic way. So we're coming together in this space to tend to the soils for a planetary network of bioregions to eventually form. We're doing so by playfully experimenting, practicing prosocial, deepening our understanding of landscape partnerships as we contribute to their development on the ground in our bioregions. And sometimes we do so just by showing up. And so that's the big picture of what we're doing here. And today, more specifically, we're going to get to hear from some people of the Great Lakes Basin as they share a symbol or story that reveals their relationship to place. This fits into the wider network as a practice of bioregions seeing each other, listening to each other, and learning how to interact, as well as bioregional learning for the particular bioregion that's sharing. But before we jump in, I want to quickly provide a possible framing for this, a way to weave it into a larger process, perhaps. In order to do so, I want to invite you all into a conversation that I'm having with a friend of mine, Claire Atwell. We are currently having conversations and designing an upcoming workshop that will hold on community art and its potential role in bioregionalism. She is a longtime community artist, and she has so many insights into how community art can, in many ways, and I'm quoting since you guys can't hear me, I wanted to let you know, hold the center for much of our bioregional learning. In teaching me some of her insights, we had a conversation just a couple of days ago. She explained how community art projects often take longer periods of time, during which participants are coming together into ever deepening relationship and continually learning new things about their community and place. As these projects evolve, people deepen their shared identities as the place-based stories and even the features and expressions of the land and its life forms somehow begin to define participants together. And through their contributions, participants also show one another how much they care, deepening foundations of trust for ongoing collaboration. That's one of the ways that it can hold the center. When it is time to share the project with the community, there is a pulse of storytelling, of increased shared identity, of coherence, of energy that all reverberates throughout the landscape. If the participants effectively wove lasting relationships, then the energy in sharing the art and completing the process can be reabsorbed and reapplied for whatever they see fit. The art itself is only an artifact, one that represents a new kind of aliveness that is formed between the participants and their place. And all of this is bioregional learning to encourage everyone to really incorporate a sense that bioregional learning has very fuzzy edges. It's about relationships as much as it is about understanding the landscape. And so today, bringing an artifact that has taught us something about our place, that holds a story of our connection, this is a sort of bioregional learning as well. And our artifacts represent a kind of aliveness that we feel that connects us to our part of Earth. Similar to community art projects, today we're sharing place-based identity, we're telling place-based stories, we're learning something that makes our places, we're learning about something that makes our places unique and inviting new relationships, building energy. And so with that, let's jump into some bioregional learning for the Great Lakes Basin. And I'm really excited to listen. I'm going to just fade into the background while we hear these. I think it's 5 people share an artifact, a story, a memory, and then we'll see where to take it from there. Perhaps we'll have some time for reflections, but we'll take it one step at a time. And I want to invite Peter to go first since he has grandchildren who will be arriving soon. Peter, do you feel like you're ready to share?
I do. Thank you. And thank you for privileging me with that opportunity. They're staying overnight, and the theme in Toronto, the Legacy Project, and the theme in Cleveland is intergenerational, as I mentioned before. So there are several artifacts which are tied together, of course. It's transmedia, right? So the picture in my background here is of my garden in Shaker Heights, where with the Arboretum and People for Trees, I'm essentially developing a small forest. Now, to say I'm developing it, of course, is silly. The 300-year-old oak tree, which is the center of my garden in the backyard, is really directing the work. I'm just the agent to help, plant a few things. This starts with trees. Since I'm here dressed as Sylvanus, Sylvanus is the Roman god of the boundaries between forests and fields. And Sylvanus was born in my backyard, born in the Muir Woods, born in the Amazon, born in Kenya, a place to go, named Sylvanus. Then what is the purpose of this art? And by the way, Sylvanus just recently was in the Museum of Contemporary Art, and we are developing programs. I really think art and museums are an important part of this conversation. So the basic message is that what can human beings learn from trees and forests about health? That has the dimensionality of biology. Like that oak tree, not only did we share DNA, but I've been lying in my hammock and thinking under that oak tree for long enough that I know I have carbon and oxygen from that tree in my body, and it has carbon and oxygen in its body from me. So it's biology, but it's also metaphor. I mean, for God's sake, you almost can't have a conversation without going back to the roots, right? And the last is the work that's been done looking at the relationship between human civilization and the forests that are around them, whether it's cutting them down for masts or paper, or burning them, or clearing them for forests, or climbing out of them in our early phases. We have developed our relationship to the planet in deep relationship with forests, and we need to keep doing that. And Cleveland was called Forest City, and the Cleveland Tree Coalition, of which I'm a member, is trying to reforest Cleveland. So let me go to my real artifact, because I said transmedia, right? So in order to do that, I have to get rid of my virtual background, which of course I will know how to do perfectly, except when I'm on stage, and I'm almost finished here. The tree doctor manifests in lots of ways. And I have my forest green stethoscope and my statue with the magical boral thinking about the future. It's actually an ant. I can make this. This is a commercial artifact that I'm sure if I knew the story of how it was produced, I wouldn't be proud of showing it to you. Nevertheless, we have to celebrate trees and our relationships with them using as many artifacts and as many storytelling. It's all about telling new stories. So the story I tell Harvard neurologists, hey, MD, PhD from Hopkins, but I became a tree doctor. Now, before they certify me, I think there's a thin line between being disruptive and being creative. And I'm trying to find that boundary, and I'm trying to bring that creative tension to when Joe visits Cleveland on February 8th, 9th, and 10th. So I don't know if that's what you want, but that was there was a whole series of artifacts, right? Okay, there I am. What do you guys say? And I feel complete, or I have spoken.
I don't think that we have a phrase for that. We used to say over.
Actually, for me, it's over and out because I have to leave early.
All right, fair enough. That says it all. Well, thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. Yeah. I feel like I've seen that tree before too. Maybe we all have, maybe it's in our genetics. Yeah, does anybody want to go, feel ready to go next? Preston, Anna, Shantae? Preston, over to you.
I'm happy to go next. I realized in my little intro to begin with, I didn't mention my land acknowledgement, which is kind of odd because it's something I usually focus very heavily on. So yes, the North Shores of Toronto here. traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, among other nations that have long used these territories and such. The other thing that came up was the weather weirding. I really like that phrase. I think I've seen Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who spends a lot of time putting together videos to try to help people connect to the bigger picture. Also uses that term. So I wanted to throw that out there since that was mentioned as well. So to get to my artifact, I come from a background of a bunch of different things: clean tech, building industry, green buildings, etc. I've been on a very circuitous journey the last 20 years, but the last 5 things began to shift considerably, and that's where, living in this very urban environment, I have come up with this artifact. I was looking for something that told a really complex story about where I am at in my life right now. This is a paving stone. It is a paving stone that I discovered in the backyard of this property when we acquired it almost 5 years ago now. The backyard was completely overgrown because with so many houses in Toronto, focus is on getting, the inside renovated and getting it sold. Nobody's particularly worried about backyards. And so it took me a while to really begin to look at the backyard, figure out what was going, because it was overgrown, it was decaying wood structures. And then we had COVID, and there was just so much going on that it didn't get looked at. But over this last summer, part of a process of and so it's a connection between the micro, 18-foot wide property that's 100 feet long here in a dense urban center, compared to the whole grand landscape of the Great Lakes bioregion, or even just Toronto itself. And part of where this came from, it's about a century old. This community is known as Witchwood Barns. A little over a century ago, they built a streetcar line across this area, east to west. And to build that streetcar line, they had to fill a whole bunch of creek beds to create a nice flat landscape to have that streetcar go along the way. And in that process, they buried all these creeks. And so when you do a walk on a lot of these streets, if you stop and listen to manhole covers, you can hear the creek down below. The water's running all winter long because, down there it's not as cold as it is up here. And so there's this relationship of urbanization to the landscape that's a very, very complex situation. And so my journey in the backyard at first was just discovering a few of these. And I thought, okay, maybe it'll make a nice little quaint area where I can do an inlay in the ground and I'll have something to talk about. But as I worked through the soil, because people had, have rocks back there, there was bricks, there was all kinds of garbage once I started taking out the wood structures. And so I spent all summer really going back there and a little bit at a time working through. In the end, I found 600 of these paving stones. They lined the back fence, they were buried under a deck, they were filling all kinds of holes and spaces. And I began to realize that the streetcar barns, which has now been repurposed into a community space for artists and for community events, and for there's like a farmer's market there, and there's a dog park, and there's all this stuff. It was originally paved with these stones. And when I went through a process of rehabilitating that space to a very different community, I guess they offered them out to the community. And so the whole neighborhood, these stones are, edging properties. They're doing all kinds of different things in little corners of this neighborhood. And so there's a connection to these paving stones that I think can really be a narrative for this type of community. And it becomes about composting the existing infrastructure, the urban setting, the what is here that is going to be here 100 years from now? What is here that won't be? How do we define those things? What are they going to look like? What gets lost? What gets salvaged? But I think urban landscapes are a really big curiosity in that process. And so from that micro to the macro, I think this is a way of engaging with the community, a way of people being able to interact with these spaces, the stories of it, and begin thinking about, what does re-indigenizing mean in this space? And so that is my journey there. I think that covered most of what I wanted to hit about it. Yeah. So I will leave off with that.
Hey, thank you, Preston. Really appreciate that. Yeah. And I love the metaphor of composting, but really it's not even a metaphor. And when we can see that it is actually, in a sense, I mean, it's recycling nutrients, right? It's taking them from some form that they existed before that's maybe no longer working, no longer bringing value to a wider system, and reapplying them somehow, transforming them and giving them a new use. And when Joe talks about, composting, the civilization, or however he refers to it, for a while, it was so metaphorical for me, but it is actually physical as well. It's really interesting. So thank you for that. I appreciated it very much. And so we have Anna and Shantae. Are either of you ready to share your artifacts, story?
I'd be happy to go next.
Okay, thanks.
I'll preface this story, and I have to choose, and that's a tough choice, but to preface this with backstory on this land. When first encountering this land, my husband and I were looking for a place for ourselves, and we are craftspeople and low income, and we had very limited resources, and so the land that I saw advertised in the local paper was greeted me. The realtor did not describe this land other than to say it had great road frontage, which was not on our list, but that what met us on first encountering it was that it had a dump on it. About an acre of this land had been inhabited for generations by a family who lived in absolute squalor. No permanent structures. They lived in, discarded or old vehicles and buses and things, and they'd fill them up with trash and then haul another one on. So I could have brought human artifacts, to this space, but chose not to. So with a great deal of labor and love, that was cleaned up, and all of the materials that were recyclable were done so properly. But to just be able to see beyond the abuse and to feel into the land's call for help, which it was definitely signaling to me very clearly. And so, decades later, this is now restored, rewilded for nature to manage beautifully by herself. I had a couple of beautiful young men come into my life just pre-COVID. It's like the universe sent them to me. I had been sort of asking myself, if I were to attract people to share this land, what would that be like? What would that feel like? And I didn't take any action, but the universe just miraculously sent me these two young men, and like soul sons, and to this day, one of them just left here just this morning. And but that first season, they stayed here out in the orchard in tents, and they wanted to learn how to, work the land organically, and to learn, what they could. And so we established, beautiful relationship, very soulful. And at the end of the season, when the snow was nearing, we decided to have a parting last supper, which we prepared together, and beautiful, yummy vegetarian pot pie. And as we put it in the oven, we thought, well, let's go take a walk while it cooks. And so it was November, the leaves were off the trees, and it was a clear night, just a slice of moon, not quite a quarter moon, but clear skies. And we walked in the dark, and it was dark, and we slowly made our way, sort of feeling our way, and to the opening to the forest path. And we stepped just inside the forest, and I looked up and was able, really for the first time, with the canopy cleared of leaves, to be able to see the sky and the stars and the moon and the crystalline beauty and peace in that space. And a poem just came into mind by Tagore. It's very simple. It says, "Trees are Earth's effort at speaking to the listening heavens." And the spaciousness that opened up in my awareness, in my consciousness, in my heart, as I saw the form of the trees and the branches reaching up towards the sky, almost in praise, and knowing also the function of trees in our natural environment to transmit moisture and nutrients, receiving sunlight from the sky, transforming that into energy and chloroform and oxygen and nutrients for the tree that they send down into the soil, and then drawing moisture up through and offering that up to the atmosphere. So this is constant circulating exchange. And it just seemed such deep truth that Tagore was expressing in that poem, speaking to the listening heavens, offering up and receiving and offering up in communication. And I just spoke the words of that poem and lifted my arms up and making like, spreading my fingers like the form of the tree and just sending up a message of joy and gratitude to the universe. The boys did the same thing, and it just, filled us with this sense of connection. We proceeded down the trail a little ways, and I stopped at a tree I always stop with and commune with and greet right next to the trail. And I put my hand and my forehead on the tree and was just, again, communicating, listening, and offering gratitude. And as my head was bowed and touching the tree in my hand, was sending gratitude, both boys simultaneously exclaimed, "Wow." And I opened my eyes and they said, "Did you see that?" And it's like, I didn't see what they exclaimed. And they said, "A shooting star went over right then, right at that moment." And, this almost overwhelming sense of jubilation and gratitude came in to me that, what was this? Was this a response from the universe to our effort at speaking to the listening heavens through the trees? Were we channeling our gratitude, and the trees were continuing and offering that up to the heights, up to the heavens? And that experience, it was so funny because one of the boys then exclaimed, "Wow, magic, better than Disney." And it just made me laugh, because nature offers us these moments of such profound magic and mystery that deepens our sense of awe and wonder and love and gratitude that surpasses anything that we humans can create, in the material world. And So I just feel that there's a constant invitation that nature offers us all the time to engage, with her, to listen, to open, and connect. So there it is, my story for the moment, and I thank you. And I'm complete.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I'm so humbled as a facilitator to try to follow after such a good story. You certainly were ready to tell one today. You tell stories like, I mean, you could almost speak into a voice recorder and write a book. That was so descriptive too, very, very descriptive. I felt myself there. So thank you for that. Anna, would you like to follow on?
Yes. I'm not quite as eloquent, but I brought two artifacts, one that's just kind of a joke, but I also don't feel like you can talk about buffalo and a sense of purpose and identity without talking about the Buffalo Bills. In terms of core design principle 1, Bills fans have it down pretty pat. My husband is a big Bills fan and will wear the Bills colors and everything, no matter what season it is. And whenever we're in other cities, we always find other Bills fans. I've been in Tampa and somebody shouted out at us from across the store, "Go Bills." And there's also a really amazing sense of community if you ever get to go to a tailgate at a Bills game. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I feel that that identity and sense of purpose in terms of group cohesion, Bills fans have that. The actual artifact that I wanted to bring in terms of connection to land is this. I have a picture of it because I could not. Yes, let's go Buffalo. Especially you go out nowadays to a restaurant on a Friday or Saturday night and you are just smacked with red and blue, especially because we're in the playoffs right now. So but anyways, so the actual artifact, I wasn't sure, I couldn't think of like a good thing to take from here, so I have a picture. This is, so you can kind of see it, this is a pier, so it's along the break wall. Is this, I also have it on my computer, if I could just share a picture of it too, if that's easier. I don't know how.
Yeah, let me give you co-host privileges. Yeah. All right, you've got it.
There we go. So it's not the best quality, but so this is a picture of the breakwall, and that separates the Niagara, or it's also known as Bird Island Pier, and it separates the Niagara River. To your right, you can see the Niagara River from the Black Rock Canal on your left. In front of you, you see the Peace Bridge that connects Buffalo to Canada. So you can actually walk along this pier, and it's a beautiful scenery. You can walk along this pier, you can go right under the breakwall, and it goes on for, I think it's about 2 miles. And it's just a really serene, beautiful view of Buffalo along the waterfront. It's a lot of not natural and hard landscapes that and shorelines, but it does give you a really good picture of the industrialization of Buffalo. And it also connects to a Unity Island, which was up until 2015 called Squaw Island, which a Mohawk woman in 2015, it's amazing that it was named that long, for almost 200 years, finally petitioned to get it changed because squaw is derogatory towards Native women. They changed it finally to Unity Island. And this island, it is just soaked in history and social justice history. It was actually one of the last stops on the Underground Railroad before people were able to cross the Niagara River to get into Canada to safety. There is an Underground Railroad museum there that the Friends of Unity Island are caretakers of. It's all people in the Black Rock community. It's technically supposed to be cared for by the city of Buffalo, but there's the way that I guess how it was created is the city of Buffalo really does not upkeep it. It does not open it to the public. So people in the Black Rock community have taken it upon themselves to make sure that this museum is open and kept clean. It's relatively small, but it really has become a harbor for people in the Black Rock community, which is a fairly impoverished community that has a very high immigrant population. But Unity Island has become a beacon for this community. It's a beautiful park right on the water. You see a lot of fishermen fishing, even children swimming in the water. Unfortunately, this is one of the most polluted areas on our waterway in Buffalo because of the CSOs that are in the Black Rock Canal. There's a high concentration of CSOs all along there, and because of the high immigrant population. There's a lot of people who aren't native English speakers who might not understand that, or they're in an area, especially during COVID, where all the swimming pools shut down, and this was their only access to cooling off in water. And so it's a huge community health concern. And the reason why I feel connected to this is I'm a volunteer with the Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers. This is an area that they really, really focus on. And I've been able to kind of learn more about this area. We do water testing on a monthly basis here. We have held events here. There's a beautiful event space that is kind of like a bowl area that you can sit in and you can have events, whether educational or cultural. And it's really it's a combination of sad and polluted and industrialized, but also just such a beautiful space for community for these people, that it's really just, I find that this is just such a such an amazing place that I want to continue to help to grow and to clean. And I think that the fact that the community itself takes on such a great role in this, the taking care of this location is also just an amazing example of what prosocial can do, and how can we encourage that and help groups collaborate to ensure the maintenance of sites like this. So that is what I wanted to share. Oh, was I not sharing?
No, you were.
Okay.
Yeah, you were.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, yeah, I feel like you really communicated Buffalo. I mean, from my family there. So Bills, that was perfect. Post-industrial pollution, but potential social issues. Yeah, that was a pretty broad picture. I appreciate that. And we've since had both Jonathan and Roy join us. Jonathan, I know you just sort of dropped in within the last few minutes. Is there an artifact that you'd like to share, or a story you'd like to share that somehow symbolizes your connection to Rochester or the Finger Lakes or whatever?
I don't think I have anything
Okay,
exactly available right now, so
sure.
I'll just listen for a little while.
Okay. Well, that may bring us, unless Roy, I don't think that we've met before. And I think you just dropped in. I was looking at Anna's picture, so I wasn't able to see when you joined us.
Yeah, hi. I just joined a few minutes. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I'm in the car. I had to go to another meeting this morning. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona right now. But I've been on, Jonathan brought me into
Right.
this sort of arena. And I've been involved. I publish an art magazine called Lake Effect Magazine in Rochester, New York. So I'm sort of a child of the Great Lakes Basin area. I don't know how you define artifact. Could you define artifact for me in the context of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so we're just basically sharing something that that comes from the landscape or is a photo or something that symbolizes our relationship to place. And it could even be a story. It doesn't have to be anything physical. And since you're in the car, also
Okay.
no pressure. But if you feel like you could safely share a story and you'd like to, please feel free.
Well, yeah, I'm actually sitting in a parking lot, so it's a safe time for me. One of the things that up on around the was land up Lake Ontario, and there were 20 cottages along the waterfront. And when they winterized them, they didn't put a. Are you there? Can you hear me?
I was just trying to figure out if the unstable connection is mine or yours. I was going to ask people in the chat. Can people hear Roy all right?
It's a little difficult, but I can hear.
Did you get that, Roy? We may have just lost him. Oh, the many challenges of the virtual. We make do with what we have. We'll maybe let him chime back in here in a moment, but we have two other people who have artifacts that would like to share that are actually outside of the Great Lakes Basin. It seems fitting to let you go first, RJ, since you're pretty close. What is your watershed, by the way? You're probably very close to the Great Lakes Basin, aren't you? But your water flows into Chesapeake Bay. It's a guess.
No, actually, our water goes into the Delaware Water Basin into the ocean.
Right.
Susquehanna goes into the Chesapeake Bay. Very, very close. What I'm going to do, because we're right in the middle of dog feeding, I'm going to pass it to Mitty and then come back. And what I do have is an artifact of the Buffalo area. And that's why I brought it in. So if that's okay, if Mitty would like to do that, I'll be back in a few minutes.
Mitty?
Well, I'll be happy to, although the orientation is both literally and metaphorically different, because I'm bringing artifacts from land that drains into the Pacific Ocean. And I chose to bring, I don't know if you can see them, snail shells. And these two snail shells are very different, not just in shape, but in story. When I first arrived in the Santa Monica Mountains in 2007, I could breathe. I'd come in 2001 from the Mediterranean island of Corsica, and the Santa Monica Mountains are one of 5 ecosystems in the world that are Mediterranean in climate, in vegetation. And it was such a relief to be out of the city. I'd managed to persuade my Los Angeles partner, born and bred on pavements and feeling safe and at home in the city, to live dangerously and move out to a 20,000 people city right at the northern edge of the mountains, which occupy 150,000 acres of Southern California, and 80% of the land is public land not built on. So it was my refuge. And very early on, I would come across strange walking. I would come across strange areas of burnt sites with loads of snail shells and detritus around them. And I found it strange to understand what they were. Later, I discovered that by doing a lot of research into the story of the native peoples here, I learned that shell beads were one of the earliest forms of currency if not the earliest forms of currency in the United States. And what has fascinated me is to notice that as time has gone on and more archaeology has recovered and named story of this region, the time frame attributed to the shell bead economy of the Chumash people has gone back and back and back in time. So when I first arrived, people were talking about, well, it's at least 800 years old. Then it shifted to, well, it's been known for at least 2000 years. And most recently, I read that it is probably an economy that was extant 20,000 years ago in the Channel Islands of California. And there's so much for me associated with this. I've incidentally, I found through research that they're now naming an area in Morocco as having these shells, which here are considered as an invasive species, but these shells were actually feeding populations something like 140,000 years ago. And what it says to me is that we are only at the beginning of really learning our true Earth relational history. But the interesting thing about the relationship between these shells is that here in California, these shells were introduced intentionally by snail farmers. They're regarded as an invasive species. They are actually outdoing these little creatures, which are the indigenous species, or at least as far as we know, they're indigenous. Maybe they invaded many thousands of years ago. But these are, they're land-based and they eat a lot, but they're also edible. They eat fruit, they eat plants, but they're also edible, but they are pushing out some of the indigenous species because snail farmers bring in and import these snails to have as delicacy, snails on high-class restaurant tables. But the snails don't realize that they're only meant to be in the snail farms, and snails may move slowly, but they travel into other parts of the area. I could go on and on about what I'm learning about snails in the ecosystem of California, but these were one of my earliest way of beginning to understand the place I'm in and the history of place and the complex relationships, because what the snail bead economy speaks to of the Chumash peoples is that there was a very, very well developed, effectively cash economy here thousands of years ago. And there was a very sophisticated trading process between the people of the coast who had a particularly, the Olivella snail on the coast it isn't this, it's darker than this and it's harder than this. It was particularly prized. There's a different relationship between the economies of these snail beads, but they traded very extensively with the inland Chumash who were inhabiting the area I'm in, and it in many ways there are many aspects that would not look unusual to modernity in terms of the relationships. So it just speaks to me of the complexity of the land in which I live. Thank you for listening.
Indeed it does, yeah. Thank you for that, Needy. So Jonathan has Roy on the phone, on speakerphone. And so are you implying that we'll hold up the speakerphone to your mic?
I think Roy can speak and you'll hear him.
Let's give it a test.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So I'm sorry I lost reception. I couldn't get back on again, so I called Jonathan and had him fix it. I was starting to say, I'm probably not what some might define as an environmentalist. I come to this more from a stewardship perspective, a basic moral code, and that comes from me growing up on Irondequoit Bay. It's a small inland bay off of Lake Ontario, and because of the way the houses were constructed, they were cottages at one time, and you had to park in a parking lot to get to them. There was not a road that went behind them. So when they winterized those 20 cottages, they still did not put a road behind them, which created an environment for me when I was a child, that if I went out the front door, down the steps, and 30 feet out was the water. And if I went out the back door and crossed the sidewalk, there was the woods. And so we never had to worry about getting run over by a car, but we had to understand nature. And my father would say things like, if you want to swim in the water, you can't throw stuff in the water. The water's not for garbage. And so sometimes I have to be careful with people I talk to about the language. And Jonathan and I have talked about this, and I'm big on how might we unite people. So maybe my artifact is I respect from a position of stewardship, from a position of culpability. I respect the land and the water. And so stewardship's a bigger issue for me than the science, because science can be, that story can be told in 100 different ways, and it's subjective sometimes. But stewardship and moral code is not subjective, it's very objective. And it also is a conversation that unites people. So sometimes perhaps my artifact is I'm grateful to have the earth and the water. And how might we tell that experience in a way that unites people and doesn't divide us because of politics, because of perspective, because of how someone presents statistics. And sort of I come from that space.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that, Roy. And I appreciate you adapting to be able to tell us that as well through the two speakers. Yeah, what you say reminds me of Earth Law, shared by Mary Graham. It's indigenous wisdom. It's just going right to the source, trying to understand the laws that nature provides us, and so often these movements, these human political and cultural movements, create a lot of noise. So I appreciate your perspective very much.
Yeah, politics is not a religion, and it's not supposed to be. Okay, unfortunately, sometimes politics is people's religion, and science is people's religion. It's not a tool; they use it to beat the hell out of everybody else. One of the things that brought Jonathan to me is I'm the publisher of a magazine called Lake Effect with an A, Lake Effect magazine. We publish it in Rochester, and we distribute from Buffalo to Syracuse and down to Ithaca, where Cornell is. And in that publication, in the June 22 and the November 22, we publish twice a year. We introduced our readers, and we publish 20,000 copies twice a year. But we introduced our readers to something called the Great Lakes Basin region, so that they didn't just think, well, I live on Lake Ontario and it's all about me. Yeah, but Lake Ontario is part of the Great Lakes Basin, which is not one state, it's 2 countries, 8 states, and 40 million people. And there is a culture within that Great Lakes Basin. And how is the magazine representing that? And I saw an opportunity to introduce our readers to this consciousness. And so if there's anybody on the call that would like to get a complimentary copy of those 2 issues, so you can read a little bit about what we think, you can just go online and send me a note. It's Lake Effect magazine, and I'd be more than happy to share that. The more we know about each other, the more we can figure out how to work together.
Well, I think that's great. And if there's any link that I can post along with the recording to this session, please send it along via Jonathan, or I don't know if you have my email. I think I did. Okay. Jonathan, could I just Google that and find it?
Yeah, I think
Lake
so.
Effect magazine. Okay. I'll just go ahead and do that. Roy, how's that sound?
Yeah, and it's a platform for telling these stories. The main thing is I want to be able to introduce the concepts to people. And I think for me, the concept that resonates with me is stewardship. I'm Christian by faith, I'm Quaker by membership. And the Quakers 300 years ago, a lot of people trusted them because they had a moral code, and they didn't beat people up with it. They just demonstrated their moral code. They were active in the community. They did good things for people. They paid fair wages. They were concerned about housing. They were concerned about education. And so they walked their faith instead of talking their faith. And if we can find a way to walk stewardship, I think we'll get a lot more friends. As they used to say, you get more friends, more bees with honey than vinegar,
Indeed. Yeah. Jonathan, is there something you want to add on?
Well, just so you get a clear sense that Roy and I have been having a dialogue around collapse because, he feels that this is, perhaps scaring people away from what we're trying to do. As we know from our participation over a couple of years in Earth Regenerators, collapse awareness is something that is very much built into the spirit of this community, while at the same time there is no lack of optimism and passion for regenerating the earth than you could find here. So notwithstanding the recognition that we are well over the edge of the 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries, and it just seems implausible that that is not going to cause multiple disasters, even way beyond what we've already seen in terms of flooding, flooding a third of Pakistan and flooding California and fires. I mean, as the Earth's atmosphere heats up, the likelihood of forest fires increases. The melting of the tundra will release a whole bunch of methane. And it just seems like we're in a place where these things are accelerating because we've triggered what they call positive feedback in systems. So, the challenge is, in my mind, is to recognize that, not flinch from it, not pretend that it doesn't exist, and yet go forward in terms of what we know will make a difference, which is restoring landscape, territorial scale landscapes, and seeing how much of that 1/2 of the planet we can get back to biodiversity. It will absorb a lot of the carbon, and it will keep the flora and fauna going. And that's what we need if we're going to keep going. So that's just what I wanted to add. And on over to RJ.
Yes, Jonathan, that's a perfect prelude to what I wanted to talk about in relation to the Buffalo region. And this relates to what Anna had to say too, years later from when I was there. And the story before I was there, because it was a family livelihood, honestly, for 30 years, Buffalo was our family livelihood. I won't say it was always right livelihood, but it was intended to be moral. The only reason Buffalo exists and some of the other cities along the Great Lakes is because of the move west. And I think of the Erie Canal that opened up the area to Lake Erie and went straight through Haudenosaunee lands, split it in so many ways. And it already had been split and taken advantage of even before we were the United States by the King's actions. But in any case, the Erie Canal really opened this up to industrialization. And as we know, Buffalo's lost about half its population, but it's a better city in many ways. And it is an immigrant city. It's always been an immigrant city. It's been the opportunity city. Anna mentioned the Buffalo Bills. I was to early Buffalo Bills games. There's hardly anybody from Buffalo who's not a fan. What I want to mention is my artifact is of an artificial or accidental colonizer. This is my dad's business card box that was probably a cigarette box before that. And it's from his desk. He was the comptroller of Buffalo General Mills right on the lake. It's from his desk that was there many years. And it's a silver object. It actually was made in Osaka, Japan, when he was with the Army of Occupation after World War II, and then came back to Buffalo and General Mills. In any case, it has his initials, RJL. And that's also my initials. It's also my oldest son's, our oldest son's initials. You know, so there's a line there. When he was at General Mills, and I was there in summers, several summers, in that plant, you couldn't walk along the waterfront. There were guards for one thing, but second of all, because of the pollution, you wouldn't have wanted to walk there. You could go up in the elevators if that was part of your job, and you could look way, way out in Lake Erie, and you could see the grain vessels come in. You could see the ore vessels come in. All the things come across, and then you could see the pollution that was there, and you could see where the water, the so-called fresh water, went into the harbor, and it was not water you would want to be near. Everybody also probably knows about Love Canal. That was not that far away. You know, one of the most polluted areas, which has now been cleaned up. That's the point that I'd like to make, is the difference at the beginning of recovery from collapse. And most of what we now call industry was really there for a reason, and it wasn't thought of all the impacts it was going to have. It was like the water was where you dumped your waste. We didn't know any better in many cases. The Native Americans knew that, still know that. The other thing I'd like to mention is another artifact. Does everybody know what this is? It's an insulator from a telephone pole. And the only reason I have it is because the telephone poles went down. They were supplying electricity, and a lot of it went underground for the suburbs. So, and that was called progress. So in any case, I've seen from the steward standpoint just how quickly nature recovers if we cooperate with it. In 30 years, amazing things happen. And that's why I'm here with Earth Regenerators. And that's also my tie to Buffalo. It's always there. Thank you.
Thank you, RJ. Yeah, I wonder if at this stage, people just, and we've got 7 minutes left, if we just want to invite some overall reflections, if anybody wants to share, or perhaps this is a good point to close as well. I guess I'll just give it a moment to breathe and see if anybody wants to just share how they're feeling after all of that, after all that we just heard.
I'd like to bring into this space the overarching message of restoring our relationship with nature. That's where our inspiration and our breath, as it inspires us, and its beauty and sense of wholeness that it fills us with, the relationship with something so much larger than ourselves that makes our lives meaningful. This is what moves me, and I think what is the foundation of this movement. I'm complete.
Yeah, thank you, Shantae. Anyone else like to share? Preston.
Yeah, it's so deep, so emotional. It's wonderful, I think. It brings all of the background to me to the idea of the reciprocal relationships with nature, with our non-human relatives, and a reawakening of that, the reconnection and learning to let go of, you know, those pasts and see a future through this process. So I'm very, very excited and moved by all of this. Thank you, everybody, for sharing such deep stories.
Anna.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, Benji, for coming up with this idea of sharing artifacts. I think that it really lended itself to really getting deep into people's connections and people's backgrounds and what they found. You know, I feel like I learned so much about Preston's neighborhood just from those bricks, and Mitty, like your experience. I felt like I could really connect with what, like, your thought process and the way that you did it. I also love the fact that you know, I loved hearing Mitty's input, but I also thought it was really interesting that we got a bit of a piece from all relatively in the same area. So Toronto and Rochester and Buffalo and Cleveland. And I think it really ties in a lot of that like close to bioregions, neighboring bioregions, and tying it up really nice. I think that it would be wonderful if we continued to do that, you know, just kind of going throughout the country and seeing. I feel like it gives a really well-rounded perspective. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for reflecting on the process itself, because a lot of what I do is just experimenting and seeing how the community responds. And this has been, you know, one of the few things that it's like, yeah, this wants to happen. You know, we invited Paonia and Carbondale to do it, and it was a beautiful and very deep experience. I mean, it felt almost like Sunday service to me when we did it with Paonia and Carbondale, and this sort of had that same feeling. Thank you for that, and we will continue to do it. We'll invite more bioregions, hopefully not too long down the road to do it again. We'll make a ritual of it, a tradition of it. Meaty.
Yeah, I just want to say to Anna, be sure there is going to be a huge shout out, go Bills, this weekend in my house. And I think it's going to be countrywide because of recent events. I think it's one of the galvanizing moments for a nation at heart level, what went on the Bills field, you know. So go Bills.
All right. Well, I think we have enough time for one word checkout so that we could hear from everyone once again, however briefly. Does anybody feel like they'd like to kick it off?
Simple thank you for holding this. Thank you. A beautiful job of facilitating too.
Appreciate that. Thanks. I'll go ahead and pass it forward to RJ.
Hope and future. It's amazing. Yes. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yes,
Meaty?
I'd like to say thank you too. I'm very grateful. Happy that I found you guys. So I hope we can connect again.
Yeah, indeed, Martha. Yeah, we'll be here. Stop on by anytime. Yeah, Preston, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, heartened and excited very much. Jonathan.
Yes, well, thank you to have finally connected, in part because it is so great to see some of our local friends joining Earth Regenerators and joining some of these conversations. I just want to say how astonished I have been that the groundswell of interest has been really clear as we've gotten into this, where I thought we were premature and I thought people were not ready for this conversation. My sense is folks are ready for this conversation.
Yeah, the Great Lakes Basin is definitely speaking. Yeah, it's very exciting to see that groundswell. Anna?
They just feel very, very warm and happy and just interested in general in learning more about these different places and people's connection to place.
Yeah, thanks. Meaty?
My one word is deep. We've gone deep today.
We have indeed, yeah. And thank you all for it. And my closing is go Bills.
And Roy has perhaps a goodbye to say as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, please.
Yeah, the word intersections plays heavy on my mind, regardless of where people come from. If you draw circles on a board and at some point they intersect, at some point they overlap, and often if you have 5 or 6 circles, there's a small spot that's common ground. And how might we use that small section of intersections for all the different stakeholders that are out there to raise awareness, to build solidarity, to build a better future. And there are people out there to still talk about pollution, but someone was talking about Buffalo, and on Irondequoit Bay, they used to tell us you can't swim there. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. Irondequoit Bay is a lot cleaner than it was 25, 30, 40 years ago. So progress is made. It's just not where we want it to be.
Well, thank you, Roy. Was there something you wanted to add, Jonathan?
No, that's good. I just appreciate the opportunity to be here and looking forward to all of what is to come.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a good way to close it off. Feel free to unmute and say goodbye if you'd like, or waves.
Farewell,
Go
everyone.
Bills.
We'll
Go
see you soon.
Bills.
Go
Go
Bills.
Bills.